Welcome to the AfterWord.
From the loft.
I was going to try to keep moving through it. Thanks for listening. I'm Eric. I'm joined by Betty and Kirsten and Vince. This podcast is meant to look at the text that was just preached. So in this case, Ruth 1, chapter 1, that's what the 1 means, verses 1 through 5. We'll talk about that some more and see God's glory in it and some other applicable things we'll talk about.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, we're having a rough start here.
Hey, yesterday you did me. You couldn't find the word.
I did.
I loved it so much. All right, here's our intro question, though, for today. What does your name mean? Because we saw there's a lot of different names in these first 5 verses, mean a lot of different things. What does your name mean? And also, what do you wish it meant? What does your name mean, Vince?
My name, here's a little fun fact from my family. My actual name is Vince.
Not Vincent.
Not Vincent. My parents named me Vince. I think the name means conqueror or victor or something like that.
I'm going to start calling you Victor.
I want you to call me Victor. What do I wish it meant? I don't know. I mean, what I wish it meant and who I wish I was are probably two different things. I don't know. I have no idea.
I wish mine meant Monster Slayer. I knew it right away. I wish it meant this. Like some big burly guy who's just conquering all the bad guys.
All right. But what does your name mean?
Eternal ruler.
That's kind of the same.
Oh, I love it. It's so arrogant, but I kind of like it. Eternal ruler.
Why Monster Slayer?
You and Jesus, eternal ruler.
yeah, it's kind of blasphemous. What about you, Betty?
No.
Why Monster
You can't
Slayer?
just
Why did that just why was
that's
that
like
D1?
It's like the most masculine, macho thing I could think of.
But like, what's a monster? Like, what are we talking? Are we talking about real monsters or like grizzly bear?
Or like your love for ice cream.
His love for cheesecake.
The monster inside.
Yeah.
I had something that's very big, intimidating, and strong. I slay those.
Oh, yeah. With ease.
Well, Eric kind of, I mean, if he's a monster slayer.
His guns. I mean, we got Guns
right.
Reeves here. So.
Oh, you should see the image in my head. I'm not going to describe it, but you should see it.
You know what I see? I see Mike from Monsters, Inc.
Yeah.
With like
no,
arms in his
that's
hands.
not the image I have.
Your hands are like dragging on the ground. And
long, skinny legs. Little green.
All right, I'm going to share a little bit what I see in my head. It's this monster slayer is a really big, bulky guy. He has kind of a tank top on,
like
but it's
Mike.
like
Ooh, kind of a tank top.
super tight because he's bulging in his shoulders.
Is it fur? Is it a fur tank top?
It's not. It's white. I don't know why, but it's white. It's a little bit ripped.
Huh?
Kind of like him. Save me, Betty.
You've thought too much about this. You
It
know.
just popped in my head.
Oh,
like, that's
sure. It
obviously what
just popped in my head.
Thinking about this for years.
I think you're the one who came up with the question today, Eric. So I think Eric had a little something he wanted to share with us all.
Get that off my chest. My big ripped chest. I need to stop. Betty, what does your name mean?
Bethany means house of figs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew that. I can tell.
You're
I
the
can tell by
original Fig
looking at you.
Well, okay, so like
Yeah.
Bethlehem, house of bread.
Yeah.
Beth, I can see where house comes from.
Yeah.
And I guess Ani is fig.
Ani means fig, I guess.
Yeah.
Ani. Beth Ani. Fig.
What do you wish it meant?
I don't know, not that. Maybe.
Not Monster Slayer or not House of Fig?
Oh, I think Monster Slayer.
Monster Slayer. I've actually been thinking
How
about
about
that
House
one
of
for
Cats?
years.
Do you have like
I
a
bet
white
your
tank
house,
top
I bet
on?
you meant your name meant House of Cats.
Yeah, maybe House of Cats. But you could go with, I think Betty meant, I already forgot what Betty meant.
House of Figs.
No, it
No.
was
Oh, it's
boat.
different?
Boat of Jesus.
No, Oath of God.
Oath
God's
of God.
Boat of Jesus. I wish it meant boat of Jesus.
We're losing listeners by the second.
We're down to like half a listener right now.
My name means, what is it? I don't remember.
Follower of Christ.
Follower of Christ, yeah.
Follower of Christ.
It's a version of Christina.
Or Christian.
I
Yep.
could want nothing more than to be a follower of Christ. I can't think of that today. My apologies to the listener. I sound like I've got carrots stuck up my nose, but it's just really that I've been fighting a little something. So
Carrots in her nose. That's what
that's
Kirsten
why
means.
Kirsten means carrots stuck up her nose.
Eric, you're scouring the internets here. What's going on?
Yeah, I was looking up Kirsten. Here's a little fun fact. In Nordic cultures, the name is often spelled Kirsten, like how you spell it, or Kirsten.
KJ.
Yeah, Kirsten.
Yeah.
Oh, say
I
that
knew
again. Say it
Kirsten.
again. Say it again, Eric. Say it.
Kirsten.
It's like it comes naturally to you.
It does. I am kind of Nordic. At least I look Nordic.
Like Nordic monster
With the
slayer.
monster
I wasn't going to go there, but it's true. I do.
Do you have a helmet on with two horns coming out of it in your image?
Let's call him
Okay,
Mike.
so the passage was Ruth 1, verses 1 through 5. Vince, give us a recap, please.
Yeah, it's the beginning of Ruth. I don't know how to go about a recap. I'll recap kind of the whole setting because that's how we started. The end of the book of Judges, the very last verse talks about we're in a period of time where there is not a king. Israel doesn't have a king, and everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes. 1st and 2nd Samuel come after that, where the people are longing for a king, and right in between Judges and 1st and 2nd Samuel is this short narrative book of Ruth that really in a lot of ways is a gift from God because it's short. We can kind of grab onto the entire story. It's hard to split it up into 5 weeks kind of because it is just one story, but it's a short story that bridges this gap between the harsh times of the judges and what was coming in the kings who were coming. So Ruth stands in as that. So the book begins in that time period, in the days that the judges ruled. There was just a lot of heartache. There was famine in this day when the judges ruled. There was a father and husband, Elimelech, who took his family from Bethlehem in Judah, and they travel to Moab. So they go around the top of the Dead Sea and around and down into Moab, a place that's occupied by enemies of God. Take them down to Moab. They live there, and once they get there, Elimelech dies, and so Naomi is left without a husband, and with her two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And so these two boys take wives from the people of Moab. The wives are Ruth and Orpah, not Oprah, different person, but it's really hard to look at Orpah and not say Oprah. They take these two wives who are from Moab, so these are false god worshiping women from Moab. We're told they lived there for 10 years, and in that time period, the two boys die as well. So now Naomi is left without a husband and without her two sons in a foreign place in the time of the judges where they've tried to escape both the time of the judges and famine. She's left alone.
With two unbelieving daughters.
With daughters-in-law.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which we'll pick up the story next week. But yeah, that's I left it hanging there. Intentional. We can get into that more, but yeah.
Before we explore that some more, I want to ask about the graphic that Taylor made.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of meaning in it. Can you explain a little bit of that?
Yeah. By the way, if you Taylor has designed a lot of the last graphics we've used, and she does a beautiful job. It's really meaningful. She puts a lot more meaning and thought into it than probably what we see just on first glance. And so I get the benefit of, she sends me the meanings behind it too. So I work with Taylor probably not as far in advance as she would like, but some weeks in advance to give her a heads up of where I'm headed with sermons, and she gets these graphics back. So I can just walk through it. So if you have the graphic or look at it in the weeks to come, you can see it. These 4 circles around the top edges have different representations from the book, or at least callbacks in the book. The top, you see a crown that's pointing forward to the king who's coming. You see a couple who's being married. That's Ruth and Boaz. On the bottom left, you see the two women, Ruth and Naomi, represented kneeling at a tomb to represent the the death of their husbands. And then in the bottom right corner, you see this cracked earth with a cow skull and a dying plant to represent the famine. So you've kind of got the different pictures of what we see in the book represented in those 4 circles around the top. In the middle of the graphic is this tree that comes up. The roots are planted deep, and that tree is representing the family tree that we see in the genealogy that ends out the book, this family tree that goes on to David that comes out eventually in the Messiah. So that's right up through the middle, and the banner wrapped around it is the title, A Grief Redeemed. So you see the grief of what they've experienced wrapped around this tree, this family tree that comes up from the Messiah. And then all the way around the graphic, you see the barley or the wheat from either from the famine or from what Ruth gains from being a part of the line of Boaz. So just some beautiful things that come about. Across the middle, right by the tree, you see the dying plant on the outside that moves in toward the middle, toward life. So some really beautiful things, some really thoughtful work. Thanks, Taylor. If you know Taylor, thank her for that. She's done some really beautiful work there.
Yeah, nice work, Taylor.
Yeah.
All right. Before I ask some questions, there were a couple of things from your sermon prep that you talked through before we started recording that I thought were really interesting. A couple of really quick things. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
Some of the name meanings?
Yeah, I mean, you see it, the first 5 verses, the author's very clear to bring out a bunch of names, a bunch of places, which is unique for such a short book to give such detail about some of these things. And whether it's intentional or not, some of the meanings of the names can be really powerful as we look at the book. So again, I think I mentioned this on Sunday, but as a man who comes from Bethlehem, Bethlehem means house of bread, which is ironic that they're leaving this house of bread because of a famine. So in a sense, there is no bread in the house of bread. So that name meaning is unique. It's interesting. Elimelech, or split it up, Eli-Melech, is a name that means God is king. And if we come right off the tail of Judges, where it says there was no king for the people, but here we're introduced right away to a man whose name is God is king. There is no king, but God is king. It is an interesting thing to think about, the name meaning there. Whether this is helpful or not, it's kind of interesting to see the Hebrew names for the 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. They're not names that are mentioned anywhere else, and so they're kind of hard to piece together Hebrew meanings for their names. But many of the scholars think that those names have some meanings that mean like sickly or deathly. Mm. So it's just it's a precursor to what is to come. Her 2 boys are called sickly and deathly, and that is their future. We see a bunch of those names that pop up that have meaning. I think the Old Testament is full, and New Testament, the Bible is full of these names that have real deep meanings. That's why we started with Eric, the monster slayer question. Names were powerful in this day. They were often either named by who they were or what they were, or they were named and that meaning came about for them. And so some of those interesting tie-ins.
And there was another connection in verse 2 saying that they were Ephrathites.
Yeah, I mean, that whole thing from Bethlehem in Judah and of Ephrathite in Micah chapter 5, verse 2, I think it is, the prophecy about the coming Messiah walks through all of those names about where this coming Messiah is coming from. So even in the book of Ruth, there's this pointing forward to where the Messiah is coming from, which Micah picks up on and says, yes, this is where the Messiah is coming from. So we'll see, sorry to give spoiler alert, but we'll see that David comes from that line. So
even these first 5 verses loaded with layers of meaning.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have a question just in regards to the names. Because of how much weight names carry, does that mean like it's pretty common, like when people change their names based on circumstance, like thinking of Naomi later on, changing it to Mara. Is that like pretty common because of that?
Yeah, names had a significant meaning, and it's interesting because it's possible that the English translation of some of the Hebrew, they've taken on the descriptor of the person and made that the name instead of this was the name that was given to them. So let's say Eric's name actually means monster slayer. Was that actually his name, or did he slay a monster? And the description in the Hebrew is actually just saying, no, that's the guy who slayed the monsters. And then we grab onto that and say, no, that's his name, Monster Slayer. So for Naomi later, she says, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because that means bitter. I think she's saying this is who I am and who I've become. Whether it's a name change or not is unknown.
All right, I want to start here. So there's a famine. Elimelech takes his family from God's promised land. There's no king, there's chaos, there's famine, but he takes them from the promised land, goes to a pagan nation where he's attempting to provide for his family, find bread.
Yeah.
I'm trying to put myself in his position. That's a hard position. Do you stay where there's no bread and face famine, possibly starvation, or do you go to some place that is spiritually dead in order to have my family physically live?
Got some ethics going on here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the reason why I ask is, as we, the readers, are reading this, do we read that as Elimelech made a bad, wrong choice, and then it colors a lot of the rest of the story, or do we read it as he's trying to do the best that he could, and there's some costs and there's also some benefit? And
I mean, yesterday, Vince, you said that never in this passage do we see that he stops and prays and asks God for help or for direction. Yeah. And I think that his desire to provide for his family is good and God-honoring and right. I think simultaneously, maybe what he didn't take into consideration was what it is to holistically care for his family. And so he's leaving his people, his country, he's leaving where he worships, he's leaving community, and he's leaving all of that in order to have something to eat, which is important. But I think sometimes, like, as I kind of translate into culture today, like a lot of people leave Colorado, leave Fort Collins because of the cost of living, because it's so hard to make ends meet here. And they don't consider often the community that they're leaving and the church that they're leaving and all of those things. It's just, I need to get out from underneath the weight of the expense here. And so I don't know. I don't know if Elimelech took into consideration like the spiritual health of his family, because they would have worshiped and gone to the temple with their people in God's land. So when they left for 10 years, that meant they didn't worship for 10 years. And so I think sometimes it's not as cut and dry as we just need to go to a cheaper place, but it's like, what are the costs that you're giving up in order to leave? And I don't know if he took that into consideration.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Eric. It is a hard situation. I'm sure there are other cases in history that we look at and see those things where a husband, a father, a leader in a family desires to care for their family and has to make some really hard decisions based on the priority of caring for their family. I think, the question comes into mind, and this really isn't the point of the book, but it is something interesting to consider. Is it more caring to provide for the physical needs of the family than it is to provide for the spiritual needs of the family? And it seems as if Elimelech gave up the spiritual needs of the family to provide for the physical needs of the family. Seems like, again, we don't have those details, but it seems like he made a choice based on that, which I think we can come to some, at least assumptive conclusions, that his boys then married Moabite women. following in dad's footsteps. Like, what other choice is there to make? If this is what dad's going to show us, and we don't know their ages, if this is what dad's going to show us about decisions to make in times of need, well, here we are. We're in a time of need. We need to carry on the name, and this is what's available. So this is the decision we're going to make. And I think I jumped past it really quickly on Sunday, but I think there's some parenting instruction embedded in this, that the decisions we make as parents or as leaders have ongoing effects, even if we're not speaking those things, teaching those things. They're visible to the people who are following. And in this case, his boys saw the example and followed in the footsteps of their dad.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't remember. My mind's saying Deuteronomy 23, but I don't know that that's true. But somewhere in Deuteronomy, God specifically tells his people, like, you're not to go to foreign lands. And yet Elimelech did that. And so, as his boys watched him be rather flippant with the rules and laws of God about where he was to travel, and where he was to set up a home, then when it was their turn and God said, do not marry foreign women, it's easy for them in turn to follow that same example. And so, if we translate that again into today, the things that are clear, that what God instructs us, and if we're easily giving those things up, like, what is that communicating to our kids? And I don't know that they're going to then be in a place to make better or more informed choices. They're going to follow the example of what they've seen in their parents.
Yeah. I don't remember where it is either, but that the law is, I think it's interesting, not interesting, it's profound to think that the law that God gave about moving into, it was right before the people came into the promised land, moving into these lands, was to not marry foreign women. But the reason was, it wasn't, hey, let's keep these these cultures separate. It was, don't marry foreign women and take on their ways, take on their idols. So the point of all of it was not just about intermarriage. It was about taking on the worship of other gods. So that's something that these two boys are marrying in, and in a sense, they're saying, and we're okay if we have to take on the foreign gods of the people.
Yeah, and then take it one more step. This is what I have a hard time understanding. Elimelech disobeys at least one, maybe a couple of clear commands from God by moving to Moab, what his boys do, taking foreign women. And yet in God's sovereignty, one of those foreign women becomes a part of the line of Jesus.
Yeah.
Which is hard for me to wrap my mind around, because that means God using blatant disobedience, and a hard time of blatant disobedience, through which the Messiah was going to come one day. What does that say about God and who he is? And I mean, what was it, one generation earlier? It's Rahab. So a Gentile, likely a prostitute, is also in the line. She was the mother of Boaz.
We'll get there later. Yeah.
Yeah. So help me think a little bit about what does that say about who God is?
It says it doesn't really matter what we do, because God's going to do it anyway, right? Just to carry on, do whatever you want. God's going to work it out. No, I mean, yeah, I want to be careful. We have to be careful with the words we choose to use here. Because to say, yeah, isn't that interesting? God uses even those moments. Is it that he just uses those moments, or is he, and I have an answer, or is he orchestrating these moments?
Is he reacting to, or more proactive?
Yeah.
So then is God orchestrating the disobedience?
Or is he allowing the disobedience and working within the fall of humanity? Betty, go. What's your answer? Here, I'm gonna kind of push pause on this. Let's come back to it. I think it's helpful. I don't know that we'll get to answers. Something else that's interesting that we see as a part of this whole story is, if you remember back to our study in 1st and 2nd Samuel, in 1 Samuel 22, David is in a cave. He goes to this cave for help, and that's where all of the people who are down, who are bitter in soul, run to him and say, we need a leader like you. And so he gathers this group of people and they say, we need you. And so this kind of, it pushes him to say, yep, this is what we need. So he goes on the offensive, but before he does that, he takes his parents to Moab and leaves them, asks the king to protect his parents in Moab. And in the mix of 1st and 2nd Samuel, we're like, that's kind of weird. Mm-hmm. But think back on why he does that, because that's where his family line has come from. They've come from Moab. And so he's saying he's using a pagan king to now help protect his parents while he goes after Saul and the enemies. So anyway.
Well, yeah, this is grandparents.
Right.
Boaz and Ruth are his grandparents because they have Jesse, and then Jesse has David.
Obed and Jesse.
Obed, Jesse, and David. Great grandparents.
So this is David's land. He's like, let's get my parents over to Moab. That's where they're from. So,
which is really trippy. Can I use that word? Trippy.
Yeah, dude.
Because David, this is just really crass. David's not purebred, so to speak. He has Moabite blood in him. He's got Gentile blood in him. And yet he is like the greatest king Israel has ever seen that God uses, and of course through his line comes Jesus. Okay, let's trace it. Rahab,
is a
Gentile. Her son is Boaz.
Yeah.
Boaz marries Ruth, who's from Moab.
Yeah.
So now Gentile and also Moabite worshiping Chemosh blood. They have the son Obed. Obed has Jesse. Jesse has David.
So David is 3 generations away from Chemosh worshiping pagan people.
And the grandmother of those Chemosh worshiping pagan people is Rahab, a prostitute Gentile who lies to keep the slaves or the spies hidden.
Doesn't that blow your mind? Like, at the very least, it should expand our view of God and how he works and in some mystery there.
All right, back to your question. Betty's going to answer it.
Well, no, I'm not. But, I mean, I feel like this makes it even more confusing for me. But when you think even further back and further forward, like in the line to Judah and Tamar, like Tamar is up there in the I don't know what the right word, but she's in that. And then like Bathsheba. And so it's just not answering the question, but making it feel even more complicated.
Well, I mean, this is going to bring it all and push it out to Jesus. He has a follower, 2 followers, 3 followers. You've got Thomas in there. You've got Judas in there. You've got Peter in there. Push it out even further. Jesus has followers named Eric and Betty and Kirsten and Vince, that he uses people who would be extremely unlikely, and only by his grace does he put together the unique stories that are accomplishing his purposes.
Yeah, he uses messy, imperfect people.
Yeah.
Which also, I took during my quiet time today, I kind of took a deep dive into some Pharisees.
As we all do.
As we do. But just thinking about the fact that the Pharisees were all about like following the law and, keeping the Jews very Jewish and in purity and just thinking that like they were very concerned about making sure that the Jewish line persevered and that the Jewish laws were followed. And even as far back as like with Ruth, like it was already blown up. Like it was already destroyed back then, that there are Gentiles grafted into the line of Jesus. And I know that these Pharisees didn't recognize that Jesus was the Messiah, but even in that, like it breaks apart the things that they all wanted to grab onto for identity and for, for holding on to and saying, well, we're Jewish, and so that's why we're going to be saved. And recognizing that God even kind of broke apart that thinking early on, so that even though the Jews were his chosen people, he was grafting people in from way, way before Christ came.
It's all very consistent. Well, I'm going to ask the next question because I'm going to leave that one. I'm going to leave that one there. But yes, God is consistent with how he works. Bigger. There's some mystery there.
Yeah.
It's not a neat little tight little box. The thrust of this passage is a lot of loss.
Yeah.
A lot of grief, a lot of difficulty in the setting, and a loss of people. Naomi is in a rough spot by the end of verse 5. So it only took 5 verses, and Naomi is in a really, really rough spot. One thing you mentioned yesterday, Vince, I thought would be good to talk through a little bit more. He said at times when we feel that dissonance between what we believe is true about God and what we feel to be true, in this case, Naomi is feeling a lot of loss. Sometimes we need to allow our heads to lead, our hearts, when our hearts are wrestling with that dissonance, that God doesn't feel to be who the Bible says that he is in his character. We have to lean upon what our heads know the Bible actually says. I think this is what I'd like to talk about. Are there places where you've experienced that and you know you had to lean on what you know about God to be true over your heart? And also maybe, well, I'm not sure how to voice my second question yet. So I'm just going to start with that first one. Are there times when you can think that, yep, here's a time in my life where I really had to lean on what my head knew to be true about God, when my heart was nowhere close?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I think in a lot of ways, especially right after our son died, the only way my faith was sustained was by the foundation of the truth I knew in my head.
What had been built
in
you to that point
for 40 plus years.
Yeah.
I look back and I think there's no, if I'm only leaning on what I'm feeling, then what kind of God is that? I'm out. I'm done. But to lean on what I know to be true, what I'm convinced of in Scripture. And yes, so this is kind of a dichotomy that we can't really, it's a false one. We can't really split the two, because a lot of what we believe in our heads, we're also, or what we know in our heads to be true, we're also believing in our hearts to be true. So it is kind of a false way of looking at it. But those two things divide a little bit. And so for me, I was leaning on what I knew, the foundation that had been built, to grab onto that from what my head knew was true. And at times I sort of had to shut everything else down and say, but I know that's true. So I have to set aside some feelings for a time. And that I think God is using to sustain me, to keep me going.
Yeah, I mean, I think to maybe clarify a little of the language when we talk about what our head knows to be true, but what our hearts struggle with. I think maybe some handholds on that are things like what God says is true about himself in his word, and yet how we feel or our experience of him is vastly different than what he has proclaimed. And so I think that for me is the tension there, is that sometimes there is this sense that God has proclaimed these things true of himself, and yet my experience of him has been very different. And so how I feel, it doesn't feel like these things could be true. And so yeah, I think I'm in a place like that even now of wrestling to believe what God has said is true versus my experience of him, and just in wrestling through the disappointment of what he has allowed, and wrestling through who God is versus who I thought he would be, and wrestling through who God says he is, and how my experience of that is quite different than what I thought it would be. And so I believe that probably every believer comes to a point where they have to start trying to reconcile who God says he is versus their experience of him. And for some that maybe lean more on only logic, it's probably easier because there's not as much of that emotional language there. But for people who maybe have more of a language of feelings and emotion, it's a really difficult process to go through.
So the Bible is clear that God is good, but I'm not what I'm experiencing of him being good is not what I expected.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we were talking before the podcast started, and I think, like a lot of us have experienced what has felt like the silence of God and a lack of presence of God. And we know his word says that he's always near. We know his word says that he'll never leave us. He'll never forsake us. And yet somehow there's an experience of silence. And like when I translate that into like a father and a child, like a kind, loving father is not going to give his child the silent treatment. He's just not going to do that. And yet my experience of God has felt very much like a silent treatment. And so it's hard there's not like a one-to-one correlation there in experience. And so we have to say God's doing something more than what I can understand or see. And so this is not the silent treatment, even though it sure feels like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything come to mind for you, Betty?
Not exactly a specific moment, but I think recently I've struggled a lot with, and I see how like interconnected, and I've been reading about like how interconnected our view of self and like knowledge of God can be. And I see that my view of myself is pretty twisted into something that's not very true. And then therefore I've seen how that's twisted my view of God into something that's not true. And I think that's a lot more of like how I feel about it or how I'm experiencing him, but have had to really press in a lot to what I know scripture says is true about who God is and therefore who I am in Christ. But that's more broad. But I think this whole like last fall into now has been a lot of wrestling through that and recognizing like how skewed that perspective was.
So how do you deal with the dissonance? Vince, you said at times you kind of have to put the emotions to the side. I know you don't mean always, but at times you can put that to the side. For those, I'm sure there are many who are experiencing that dissonance right now. How do you process or live in or deal with that dissonance in a healthy way?
Yeah, I mean, just practically, I think some things that I have learned, maybe Kirsten, we have learned, is that there are times when part of the help there is having other people around us who are in a different place than we are. And
to remind you of what's true? Not
just to remind you. In fact, the reminding of what is true is often in the moment not extremely helpful. It can come across as, but God's got a plan, and that's never helpful in the moment. What I mean is that just the quiet perseverance of someone else to stand in beside you who is faithful, who has a deep faith that you can just sort of coast behind. So that's a piece of it. I think having those kinds of people around you is a way that God sustains your faith through some of those things. Would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's differentiating between, I think I've probably mentioned this many times, but it's differentiating between questioning God and having questions for God. And so like questioning God is, God, you say you're good, but this is not good. There's no way you could be good in this. Versus saying, God, I know your word says you are good, but this sure doesn't feel good. Could you show me your goodness in this? And so I think it's learning to differentiate between, am I questioning and doubting God, or is it that I have questions for God? And even taking the questions and the doubts that you do have and turning those into questions for God. And I also think really crying out to God in the midst of these times and just saying, God, I'm angry and I'm mad and this does not feel good. And I know you say you're good, but I don't know how this could be good. And so I do believe, but help my unbelief, like follow the cry of the Father in Mark 9. Like I do believe, but help my unbelief, because I don't know how to believe rightly in this situation, because the pain is so extreme and so excruciating. I don't know how to see you here.
Yesterday you gave 3 different encouragements for those of us who are not experiencing that dissonance. One was thank God for it. The second one was build your relationship with God. You use different words, but utilize that time now because you're going to rely upon that later. and then also build a relationship with some deep, trusted, faithful people, because you will rely on that later as well. So if you're not in that place, those are at least 3 encouragements. What about people who are currently experiencing dissonance? What are some encouragements for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is going to sound like a weird answer to that question, but I think we spend a lot of time as Christians talking about the things we do know are true. And that's good. I'm not saying we should not do that. But I think we do that so much that when we hit moments of grief or trauma or whatever it is, we think a good Christian should have all this figured out and should not be asking these kinds of questions that are coming to mind. And so I think I would say, with some people around you, step into some of those questions that are coming to your mind.
Don't avoid.
Don't avoid those, because I think in those questions, if God has you, God will answer those questions, or at least bring some answers to some of those questions. So I would say don't push away. Don't in some super righteous kind of thinking about yourself push away from questions that may be there. And I referenced what David says in Psalm 13 yesterday, that there seems to be this where from him some at least towing the line of some of those questions. Where are you, God? Mm-hmm. I think with some people around you as support to ask some of those questions, I think could be helpful.
I think that's key, having people around you, because I think a huge thing you see in our culture right now is a lot of Christians that are deconstructing their faith. And as
alone.
And that's what I was going to say, is I think what we see the pattern is over and over and over again is you see someone that's wrestling with something, whether it be hurt from the church or questions about God, or just a particular struggle in their life. And almost always the first thing that they do is they begin to remove themselves from community, at least Christian community. And then from there, they start to deconstruct without any sort of Christians around them. And then next thing you know, they've completely walked away. And so I think guardrails, as if you are in a place that there is this dissonance, there's this confusion, you've got questions, I think by nature, the response is going to be shame. A good Christian wouldn't feel this. A good Christian wouldn't wrestle with this. And I think I would love to normalize the fact that I think a good Christian is going to wrestle with things about God. A good Christian is going to struggle and is going to own the fact that there are some things about God that are really hard to understand, and there's some truths that just don't make sense. And there's a lot of experiences that this side of eternity we will never understand, and they just won't feel good. And so your guardrails in place are going to have people around you that love you enough to let you wrestle, but are also not going to let you go off the deep end. And so asking the questions, being courageous enough to ask the questions, to press in, but making sure that you've got people around you that are going to walk with you. Because if you do this alone, you are going to end up derailing your faith, because there's not going to be anybody there to walk with you.
Yeah, and those people who are there walking with you are not there to keep you from seeing the truth. There's some other worldview or something that's true, and so you want to keep the blinders on. It's not that at all. They're going to continue to point you to what actually is true, to help you from falling into lies and disbelief.
Yeah, I think that would be my biggest encouragement, actually. I think it's pretty easy for us to have a list of ways that we would encourage people who are in that moment. I hesitate to say, yeah, you should continue to do that, you ought to, whatever, because I've been in that. I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind is, in those moments of doubt or struggle, keep pushing in to try to know God, read the Bible. I just, without people around you, I don't know that actually helps. And man, I don't know if I have to turn in my pastor card now.
The pastor just said.
But I think without people around you to help hold you up in those moments, it may actually push you to a place of further struggle. And so I would I would strongly say as like the primary thing is have people, a group of trusted people around you to walk with you. And now I'll go back to what I said. If you haven't built that before struggle comes, it's going to be really hard to find that in the midst of struggle.
Which is where Elimelech and his family found themselves, right? With no community to help them.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for exploring that a little bit. I want to turn the corner a bit with second to last question. This is from our listener. It's a good question. The question is this. This person heard a statement on TV about going through grief and wanted to see what our thoughts are on that. So the statement is this. One may never get over the grief, but with God's help, day by day, one can get through it. Thoughts on that statement? Any practical advice? Any way you tweak it?
I mean, I think that's really true. And I think the reality of grief is that no one gets a pass on it. Like I've told my boys, I don't know how many times, like, guys, you don't get to pass grieving losing Ezra. Like you don't get to get around it. And so the only way to navigate grief is you have to go through it. And I think that's true for everyone. I think God helps you get through it. He helps you endure it. But, I think the temptation maybe is to try to press pause on it or try to avoid it or try to just ignore it, that it'll go away. But grief doesn't work that way. Like once you experience grief, like there's no other option but to walk through it. And if you don't, it just continues to reinvent itself in bigger and uglier ways until you're willing to engage it.
I think even the wording, the vocabulary we have is maybe not helpful. To get through it makes it sound like there's an end, right? Oh, I've gotten through it and now it's over. So I think if the word through is an ongoing sort of maybe even lifelong until Jesus returns to restore all things, when there is no crying and tears will be no more. But I think even to use the word, how do we get through it, makes it sound like we've moved beyond it.
Rather than like walk with it.
Yeah. So say the words again instead of...
instead of getting over it, it's by God's help day by day going through it.
Yeah, so getting over it makes it sound like we're somehow skipping it.
Yeah.
Or you're conquering it.
Yeah, we've skipped it or somehow gotten... Yeah. And getting through it also seems to indicate that there's an end as well. But I would say, walking with it, some kind of wording like that. Because, and this is all new to me, by the way. I'm not an expert in this. I'm actually a resident, growing, unfortunately, expert in it. Not expert, but student of it. I think my perspective of all of this was, and I'll confess, there have been times when I've talked to someone as I've been in ministry for years where they've said, yeah, this time of year is always hard because 14 years ago I lost my mom to cancer. And my thought initially in those moments, years ago was 14 years ago. Come on, that's been a long time. Get over it. Now on this side of things where what we have experienced, I hear that and I understand it. Like, yep. It's a mark. It's not getting through it. It's not getting over it. You're walking with it. And those things get lighter. You've got more space and opportunity to receive what you're now walking in and walking with. But you never get over it. You never get through it.
You don't forget.
Yeah.
You don't. I mean, an analogy I've shared before, but I think it's super helpful, is that when there's grief, especially with something like loss, when it first happens, if your life is a jar, if you look at grief as a ball and the ball is so big it fills the whole jar. And then as you go on, it's not that the ball gets any smaller, it's that the jar gets bigger. So your capacity to hold other things and your capacity to navigate things expands, but the size of grief has not changed and it never will. And so it's become a part of your story. It's become a part of your life. It's become a part of how you function. And so the grief never gets smaller, just your ability to handle it and capacity to navigate it gets bigger. And so I think that's been a really helpful analogy in understanding that Like the grief over losing Ezra will never diminish for us. It's never going to be smaller. But our ability to now integrate other pieces of life into that piece of our story has expanded. And so understanding that when you're walking with someone who's grieving, like hoping that the ball in their jar is going to get smaller is not a realistic hope. And it's putting an expectation on them. Really, it's putting your own expectation of a timeline on grief on them. And so recognizing that as they grieve, their jar is going to get bigger and it's going to be filled with other things. And so there's going to be more space for them to actually navigate life. But at the beginning, the entirety of their jar is filled with that ball of grief.
How do we walk well with other people?
Yeah. That's, I think what those two, walking with, is helpful. Something that someone talked to me about a long time ago. There was a tragic death in the life of our church, and I called someone who was just an acquaintance who had just walked through something like this, another pastor, and I said, hey, I need some help here. What do I do? And he said, well, the first thing you need to do is you need to put it on your calendar as a repeating event forever, so that you can every year go back and let that person know that you remember with them what they've experienced. That was an extremely helpful, practical tool, because we move on. The person in the middle of that grief does not. And so to walk with them in that year after year, I think is a really helpful thing. So I've just made this a practice that when something happens in the life of someone who's close to me, I put it on the calendar. So whatever date that is, it's right there, and I become aware of it with them. I know how to pray with them and for them, and walk with them in that. I think an urge I have is to speak more than to listen, and I think that needs to be flipped around. I think we need to listen more. So to be with the person and listen more and not speak is extremely helpful. Like you said, Kirsten, I think not putting our timeline on the person to move beyond what they're able to move beyond, and to be with them in that.
Yeah, I think also when someone is in a place of feeling that dissonance with God and saying, it just feels like he's cruel, it just feels like he's unkind, rather than hitting them with a truth bomb right there, acknowledging it does feel like that, doesn't it? And just letting that linger. I think we're so quick to try to defend the righteousness of God that often we're really insensitive to people in their moments of pain. And it does feel at times that these things, that it does feel that God hurts us, and it feels like he's unkind, and it feels like he's not good. And acknowledging that it feels that way is not the same thing as saying, yeah, that's who God is. But I think it's okay when somebody's in the midst of hurt to say, yeah, it does feel like that, doesn't it? And letting it sit there. And then you can circle back around and say later, we know that's not who God is, but it sure does feel that way, doesn't it?
Or even to acknowledge, if that's not where you are, to even acknowledge, I'm sure in your situation it does feel like that. So that you're not, because I may not be in a place where I agree with what you're feeling, but I could say I can certainly see how in what you're walking through it does feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're often quick to point to Scripture, which is good and beautiful and right, and yet I think sometimes our timing with that is insensitive, and knowing what is true does not help a broken heart in the moment. It doesn't actually bring peace for the moment a lot of the times. And so I think sometimes acknowledging that you know what's true, but I know that doesn't actually bring you any comfort right now.
Yeah. Thanks for exploring that.
Well, this wasn't our intent to have a Vince and Kirsten talking about grief.
That's what those first 5 verses seem to be all about. It's a heavy, dark passage.
Yeah.
So in a heavy, dark passage like this, where do you see God's glory? What is God like according to these heavy verses? Yeah,
I think it's something we talked a lot about, and it's not really in these verses, but it's all the surrounding things, like how God uses all of the people and what they walk through to continue to uphold his promise that a Messiah is coming. I mean, if I were writing the story, I would say a Messiah is coming, and let's roll out the red carpet, and here's the Messiah. It seems like God has done the opposite. A Messiah is coming. Now let me roll out the back alley and see the Messiah crawl out of this, trash heap.
I mean, I think in these first 5 verses, we don't see anything about God. I don't think it even mentions God in the first 5 verses. And so if we were only looking at these first 5 verses, I don't know that people could pull much out of who God is without the context of Scripture and knowing all of Scripture. I think knowing Scripture, I think we know that this is not where it ends and that there is redemption coming. But I also can sit in the tension of Ruth and Naomi and just feeling this hopelessness, like, what is there? What hope is there in this? And so I think maybe what it says about God is that there are these seasons that there's just darkness and you can't really see the good that's going to come. But just because you can't see it doesn't mean he's not at work doing it.
This isn't from the first 5 verses, but I think the way that you ended the sermon yesterday, Vince, was helpful by pointing us to Romans 8, where we are reminded that nothing, regardless of what we walk through, can separate us from the love of God, even if it appears that way. That's not actually true.
Yeah, I mean, this pulls in some other scripture too, but here, under God's sovereignty, he allows a whole lot of really hard things happen. And we know that he's present, but there's still a whole lot of hard things happen, which means really hard circumstances is not evidence that God is not present.
Yeah.
I know it just kind of lingers, but that at least is helpful for me a little bit. Because it also means that there aren't, I mean, you mentioned earlier, like there's really hard questions, and we can ask those really hard questions, and we can explore all those things. So when we're given, man, the really hard curveballs and we didn't expect it, that's not evidence that God isn't present.
Yeah.
This next week, Vince, what's the passage? Is it rest of chapter 1?
Rest of chapter 1. Okay. From here on out, it's chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4.
Okay.
So, yep.
So read ahead, and we'll see how the story continues.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.